In this video, we'll look at scales and how to set up scales on the tetrachords. Typically, Western scales have two names, a first name and a second name. For example, C major has first name C, second name major. B minor has first name B, second name minor, and so on. The technical term for that first name is the root note. And on the tetrachords, you set the root note by pressing the pattern button and then turning the encoder. And you know what note you've set the root note to by looking at the letters on the inside of the LED ring here. Here we've set it to a root note of A. And here's A sharp, B, C, and so on. And that's how you set the root note. Now, the second name of the scale is determined by the pattern of intervals or musical distances between each note. And on the tetrachords, that's represented visually by the LED ring here. So if you see note 1 is here, and between note 1 and 2, there's a gap. Between note 2 and 3, there's a gap. Notes 3 and 4 are together, and so on. And it's this pattern of longer distances and shorter distances between notes that gives the scale its characteristic sound. And on the tetrachords module, 3 controls are used to set that pattern. There's the tetrachord 1 knob, which sets the pattern of the first half of the scale, the first 4 notes. And you see if I turn it here, you can see the pattern changing on the LED ring. The tetrachord 2 knob sets the second half of the scale. And this button here, the flat 5-4 button, sets the distance between the first note of tetrachord 1 and the first note of tetrachord 2. So essentially, you have the first 4 notes and then the second 4 notes are higher, and this button determines how much higher it is. So those are the controls that set the scale, and we have recipes in the manual for most of the common scales there are, and then as well as that you can experiment. But really, if you wanted, you could go now and just look at recipes and play around with scales, and that's kind of all you need to know. But I'll go a little further in depth here, so I might just set up a trigger so we can have a bit of a listen. So these are the options. Both tetrachord knobs can set the same 6 options, and it turns out just by combining the 6 possibilities of the 4 note patterns, you can create just about any scale you'd want. So here I've got some triggers going in. Actually, I'll start here. Each tetrachord changes just by 1 note. There we go. And as I said, you have the same options. You have a listen there, and this is set to the same pattern, and so that's the same pattern. Just up higher, and if I disable these, you can hear just the sound of the first note of each tetrachord. And at the moment, this one is set to 5, and you can see the 5 is this number 5 on the LED ring here. And so if I set it to 4, it's going to be lower sounding. And then flat 5 is this one here. And back to 5, and I might just set some more continuous triggers so this is quicker to hear. So you hear now it's playing through a full scale, and if I change the start of the second tetrachord, it sort of fairly dramatically changes the sound. And just as a general rule of thumb, let me just pause that. As a general rule of thumb, actually, the setting the second tetrachord to 4 will sound a little bit different, but quite possibly complementary to whatever you have going on with the tetrachord start, the second one set to 5. But the flat 5 setting will probably sound, will probably take you to a pretty different place. Anyway, that's those are the 3 controls that you use to set the scale. Probably the last control that's relevant to scales in general is the encoder, and what the encoder does when you just turn it without pressing it or doing anything. And how that works is you'll notice that one of the notes is highlighted by whatever colour track we're on, and the highlighted note tells you which note corresponds to button 1 of these buttons. So if I get our notes playing again, right now button 1 is playing the first note of the scale, and the second, third, etc. You can keep on going up an octave, you can keep on going down. But that's how that works. And so it sort of shifts the note along, and all the subsequent notes shift too. So yeah, and so that's how the encoder works. So that doesn't actually change the scale as such, but it changes the sound very much of what the buttons are doing as it shifts it along, in steps along the scale. And I should probably mention that there's an alternative way of doing the same thing. You can hold down the shift button and just press the number the button associated with the scale number that you want to play. Yeah, and that just about covers everything. That's kind of everything practical. There's probably one sort of technical detail that's worth mentioning, is that the way we've set it up, the tetrachords aren't allowed to overlap, and so what that practically means is, so you can't have the note, if this is a note 4 in the scale, or if this is set to note 4, we don't let this be any note higher than 4. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because when you have this button set to 5, it means that this note here is the octave. It's sort of note number 1 come around again, and so you're not allowed to select Lydian, because that would make it like an augmented octave. And we actually tried to do that because it's a pretty cool sound to play around with, but when we first made the module, but it was just too confusing looking at the LED ring and not knowing which note related to which button. So when this is set to 5, you can't put this on Lydian, so it doesn't mean the knob's broken or anything, it's just you can't do it. And there's a similar thing happens if this is set to 4, then it means this tetrachord can't be set to Lydian. So sorry, that was a fairly technical thing to finish on, but sometimes people get worried because understandably that maybe something's wrong, but that's by design. And that is comprehensively probably everything there is to know about setting up scales on the tetrachords.